about issues and challenges in content testing as applied to the field of e-learning testing, the e-learning courses. Okay. Myself, Ashwin Maru. I am a senior manager for the QC team in Eurix Systems Private Limited. So I have almost close to 23 plus years of experience in IT and more than almost 16 years in QA testing QC. So almost last 15 years I have been predominantly into the testing in various fields, both product companies and project companies. And currently in Eurix I am leading a testing team which is primarily into content testing for e-learning courses. So today I will briefly be touching upon the issues and challenges that I have seen being faced in this duration for content testing. So the agenda is a quick and brief introduction about Eurix. Then the key factors along which we face the issues and challenges in content testing. And then a bit of elaboration of those 5 key factors. And finally, we'll have an open Q&A session where I'll try to address your queries to the best of my abilities. Okay, to begin with, brief about Eurix. Eurix is predominantly into e-learning. So Eurix started as a e-learning company. So they are into a couple of products of their own. They also do a lot of projects for e-learning content for various clients. They are into content generation. I mean, given the content by client, they generate the e-learning courses using the various tools and technologies. We are into porting of the old Flash into new HTML5 kind of things. Then we have a division which is into e-publishing and pre-press kind of things also. So as you can see, there are 4 verticals within Eurix. Eurix Learning, that is into the projects for generating e-learning courses. The product development group, which is responsible for the 2 products that Eurix has, Kitabu and Dictera. Then the 3rd vertical is about the e-publishing and the pre-press technology that I was talking about. And the 4th is independent QA services. So predominantly, as I mentioned, we are into e-learning domain. But the QA services group, in addition to the e-learning, QC and testing requirements, we also do projects into other domains as well. So Eurix is a 15 plus year old company. Currently the total team size is about 500 plus, and in the testing team we are almost 100 plus spread into the internal and the independent testing services. Recently we participated in a survey and some information gathering exercise with one of the magazines in the US, Outsourcing Gazette. And based on all the interaction and the survey participation, we got a certificate from them for one of the upcoming QA services vendors. So based on our in-house experience in QC and testing, we, as I mentioned, ventured into the independent QA services, and now that is a growing business for us. Yeah, coming on to the main topic of today, as I mentioned in the previous slide. So we'll be covering the key factors in e-learning content testing along the 5 topics that are listed out here: content, usability, technology, environment, process. At any point, if any of you have any queries, please do put the same on the chat window and I'll take it up, or maybe we can take it up in the end in the Q&A session. If at all any of you feel that I am going a bit fast, do let me know and I'll slow down a bit as required. Okay, so coming to the key factors about the issues and challenges that we face in content testing, especially for e-learning, they are along these 5 dimensions pertaining to content. As the name suggests, we are into content testing. Then pertaining to usability, pertaining to technology, though that is the least of our concern because most of the challenges are more for the implementation side, but a few things do hurt us here too. One of the most important is the environments, which is the reason why we have compatibility testing throughout the testing industry, and as a consequence in content testing too. And last but not the least, process. So process makes the difference as to how well we are able to do our testing activities. The overall process and the process followed in testing per se. Okay, talking about the content issues and challenges, broadly we face issues and challenges both related to storyboard, correctness of content, the audio and video content, animations, and one of the most important is the assessment and feedback. So depending on how all these things are implemented, the QC or testing team will face challenges in all of this. So if the IDVD reviews and approvals are not done properly or maybe are partially done due to various circumstances the way the development progresses, it can lead to challenges for a QC team because we have to map the content against the storyboard. Not only that, the font and formatting as may be specified in the SB, the storyboard, and as found on the actual implementation, that can also be a challenge at times. So many times in the HTML kind of things, maybe you can make out in the browser what is the font and formatting being applied, but many times because of specialized requirement like in math or any of this equation oriented kind of things where specialized libraries are used, it can be a difficult task. So the visual abilities of a tester comes into play, and that provides us with lot of issues and challenges. Another thing is correctness of content. Though maybe the SB might be provided by either, let's say, the implementation team or maybe the client, sometimes there might be issues in the way the SB might have been generated. So at times even the QC team has to somehow be looked upon to come up with the subject matter expertise kind of thing. Though we may not be the SME, but we have to maybe look around, find out if we feel that certain content is not right. So we have to on our own find out why some things do not seem to be right, or maybe we need to find a SME and get it resolved. In short, we have to bring it to the notice of the other stakeholders to have that corrected. Another important thing in the overall content as well as audio, video and animation is consistency and sequencing and flow of the codes. This is a very important thing because that is going to affect the learner's experience. Audio. So audio is another area of challenge, especially when it is machine audio, because the audibility and the ability for you to understand and make out whether the correct pronunciation and words are being uttered. So it is a difficult task at times for the QC person. And more so is the equipment that we are using, especially the headphones and earphones that we use. So one of the consequences is that for some courses we keep very good quality headphones available because sometimes the normal headphones that you normally get may not be providing you audible information. So quality of audio, synchronization, and whether it is machine or real audio, that also impacts the ability of QC to add value. Videos. In videos, many times it is the format and type, so that is taken care of by the implementation team. But finally, when it comes to QC, if some of the players maybe are not correctly matched, then we face troubles there. Another thing is the size of videos and the consequent loading time. That throws a lot of challenges for a QC team. So then it becomes difficult for us to many times find out whether it is the bandwidth that is hurting or it is purely the preloading times if a preloader has been put into the e-learning course implementation. So then we have to go and be able to fine tune and pinpoint what is the actual root cause of the problem. so that the development or implementation team can then actually solve it correctly and then remedy it. Animation is another area where we face challenges because we need to have the correct sequence and able to understand the interactivity functionality. So we do have KTs to handle this along with the implementation as well as the people who have provided the actual content to tide over this. But if that does not happen, then obviously we have to do the understanding on our own. So that is another area of challenge. Last but not the least is the assessment and feedback. So if the implementation over there is straightforward and correct, it is obvious and we can do it nicely. But many times we have to look for all the wrong types of inputs that need to be entered to see that the functionality does not misfire. Especially if you try to give wrong answers many number of times and maybe the functionality breaks, or the feedback that you get on entering the right or wrong answers. So these are things which do become an impediment for us, and that's why they are an issue and a challenge for us. So I spend maximum time on content because content testing, by its very nature, content is the king over here. Usability. This is another very important area because we are talking about courses and e-learning. So usability is prime for any student, be it a college or school going student or even a student in the corporate environment. So if the learning experience is not good, it will have a lasting impact, and whatever you are trying to impart to the person who is learning, that may be lost because the attention may go away from the course onto the way the functionality is breaking down. So usability is very important. That's why the navigation of the courseware is important. We need to pay very important attention in the way the player controls work, the back and forth mechanisms work, integration with any LMS or SCORM compliant containers, how they work. Also the instructional design has to be good. We have to pay very good attention to the sequencing and context, and many times we face challenges if the things are not properly designed because we need to think from a student perspective and see that it makes sense for the person. Also sometimes the visual design part also hurts, the color choices, graphics. Maybe the person who designed the VD part of it may have thought it from, let's say, one platform or environment perspective. But when we go into compatibility testing on other environments which may have not been thought of, then they present challenges to us. Another very important area is about the accessibility of 508 compliance. Now this is a requirement in many places, especially in the Western world, and now maybe even in the other countries also. So wherever this is a requirement, testing for 508 compliance is another challenge for us. For PC and Mac and all, many of the things are well defined, but for the upcoming handheld devices like tablets and mobiles, we have to figure out the ways in which they are getting implemented and how to enable and disable. Many times it is not known to any newcomer in the field. So we have to figure that out. And also these platforms keep updating a lot. So we have to find out all the new ways in which it is getting implemented on this. So various technologies like Siri in Apple and TalkBack in Google implement part of the accessibility things. In Windows and Mac, the standard things are already in place, and we have to exercise that to test the accessibility. Another important area is to exercise the help and tooltips. So at many points, we face challenges when those things don't work properly as per expectation. Obviously, we log defects, but before we log defects, we have to spend time to understand whether really there is a challenge or not, and why it is not working, so that we are able to do more justice to the defects that we put into the system. Technology. Technology, as I mentioned, is more for the implementation side, but from an integration perspective, technology can play an important role, especially the various players, the content players that will come into play. So depending on what tool has been used by the implementation or development team, the player of that particular tool, or maybe an in-house player if designed by the company implementing that particular course, that needs to be understood on the platforms on which that tool will work. That needs to be understood. So that has its own issues and challenges which the QC team needs to understand and tide over. SCORM compliance is another technology issue. So wherever the courses need to be SCORM compliant, depending on whatever version they are compliant to and whatever SCORM container or LMS tool the course needs to work in, we need to be abreast of all the requirement of that particular compliance and be able to test that as and when required. Same goes with LMS integration. So we need to be aware about all the things which are required in terms of the user details, the scoring, the timing information, the session information that needs to be stored and maybe passed on to the SCORM container or the LMS tool. Another important area is localization. So many times we might have teams which might be equipped only for our main language, but then multi-language testing may come to us. So some of that, if it is not heavily into content, we try to do by comparing. So that is another challenge for us to take care of. But if it is heavily into content, obviously we have to engage people who are equipped with that language knowledge. Another important area which is a challenge is the regional formats which go along with the language, especially for the foreign areas which differ from the mainline language like English. So there the currency, date formats, etc. become important, and we need to watch out for those things and have our process and checklist in place so that it is not missed by the QC member doing the testing. Environments. Now this is another important area which is increasingly becoming very important in all software testing and even especially in e-learning content testing. So besides desktops, now the more prominent environments are the tablets. They are becoming the most important tool which are getting used in academics as well as for the corporate environments. Day by day it is increasing. Even the handheld mobile devices are becoming important because the size of screen is also increasing. So this is an important area of QC or testing for us. So we need to maintain a lab having all the relevant devices, and always we need to keep abreast of all upcoming versions of browsers, OS, devices as the case might be. If we don't have, we have to procure, or we need to either go in for simulators or maybe a remote access onto some of the online services who provide those devices. So coming back to that, the important areas for most of the devices for content is size, resolution, orientation. Another important area is the speed of network access, because a lot of content is online today. So whether it is over LAN, whether it is over Wi-Fi, cellular, or any low bandwidth kind of things. So this is where that images, audio and video challenges will become predominant. If the videos or images or audio files are big, and if the preloaders are not in place, so then that will add to the challenge of the person. So from a user perspective, we need to pay attention even on that. So sometimes we have to capture timing information also and provide the root causes of where things are going wrong so that the development or implementation team can attack that. Last but not the least, process. So this is a very important thing. So all the other things are to do with the way the implementation happens, the technology parts, the environment parts. But finally, if the processes are not well defined in the way that things flow between the implementation and development team and how it is taken forward to QC and the back and forth mechanisms, they are not in place, they are not well oiled, then even the best of the effort can fall apart, because there is a lot of reliance on QC. The development team may not have the ability and the bandwidth to maybe try out whatever they have developed in all the compatibility environments that I talked about in the last slide. So the reliance on QC for that is very much required. Hence, the process has to be well defined, how there will be a handshake and communication between the development and the QC team in terms of passing the status, in terms of handling the defects, and how the defects workflow will flow. So the most important part in process is whether the planning and estimation is in place to take care of all the upcoming tasks that the QC team will have to handle. Also, how we'll go about how many rounds of testing or cycles of testing will be required, whether we have the requisite compatibility device lab in place, whether we are able to plan for all the upcoming things and then balance out the load. Another important area for the process part is handling scope changes. Now, the scope changes can be due to client requirement or changes in storyboard, or maybe if there is feedback from ID and VD which came in late even after the QC had started, then the environment metrics getting changed because of some new environment that got released. So based on that, the planning, estimation, and the replanning needs to be good enough to take into our control all the updates that happen. So one of the important areas I mentioned is about defects. The way the implementation and development happens nowadays, there is very fast turnaround in terms of having to do the implementation and development, then passing it to QC so that we are able to test on the relevant things, and then doing the handshaking in terms of giving status. So the defect life cycle has to be well worked out, and the relevant defect tool needs to be in place, which will really help us in doing this defect life cycle to our specification and meeting our requirements. So defects is a biggest issue and challenge for a QC team in all scheme of things in software testing. So some of the statuses where we run into challenges is when, as I mentioned, we will have multiple rounds of testing. The first round will not clear everything. So once we have found all the defects in the first round, they will go for fixing, then they will come back again for another round of verification and testing. So one bone of contention is when we find new defects in the second round. Oh, why did you miss it in the first round? So there can be a lot of factors. Maybe it can be a miss from the QC side, but then there are other factors also. So a related term is that there can be regression breakdowns. So we have the concept of induced. So all news may not necessarily be new. They can be new as a miss or due to some other reason, or they can be induced. So induced is a very important thing that we use in our kind of scheme of things. Then the other things where we will have bone of contention is invalid. Though we may allow the defect, the implementation side may feel that it is invalid due to various reasons. So there has to be a discussion and true invalids need to be found out. Another area of contention is works for me. So as in other normal software testing, even in content testing, this is a big issue that it works for me. So again, we have to go and find the root cause, why it is working for the developer, why it is not working for the tester, and find out the difference in environment for both of them, and then be able to come to a resolution, yeah, whether it is a defect and it needs to be fixed or not. Another big area is categorization. All issues we need to categorize. Because we are talking of content testing, categories need to be about the functionality, about audio, about video, about graphics, about environment related things, about whether it is a storyboard error. So we have to come up with a huge list of categorization so that we are able to tackle it properly when we are going to fix it, and then even prioritize whether it needs to be fixed or not, depending on the various things in place and the constraints of the moment. Last but not the list is status and issue management. So we need to have proper tools in place. Even if you have an Excel sheet for doing status and issue management, that is good enough. But you need to think it out well enough so that it does not lead to problems between the various rounds of testing that a QC team has to do along with the development and implementation team. So we have to prioritize tasks, we have to do continuous tracking and provide real-time status so that we know where each and every project stands in terms of the amount of fixing that is required, the amount of verification that is required. And another important area is metrics. So there is a challenge as to what all metrics we need to capture to control the status and issue management. So we need to identify all relevant metrics. So the other software testing metrics may not necessarily apply in this context because of the nature of content testing. So we have to come up with our own metrics which we need to then track and measure the performance of the QC team as well as the overall development process also. From my end, I have covered all the main points about the issues and challenges faced in content testing as applied to e-learning. Now I'm open to questions from all. Okay, one of the question maybe I got about is the important areas on devices about which are important for e-learning. So even as I was discussing earlier, one of the most important devices is the tablets. So tablets are predominantly becoming important for us, especially the iPads and the Android tablet, the 10-inch variety. And iPad is the 9.x8 inch. So these two are the predominant environments on which we do the testing. Obviously, we also do testing on 7-inch, but these two are the heavily used environments. And coming to even the iOS versions, the query was about that. So iOS version 7, 8, and now the 9 is the upcoming one. So these are most important. So iOS is the most #1 important platform. Second is the Android tablet, the 10-inch variety. These two are the most important platforms. Obviously, the desktops are important, but in devices, these two are the most important platforms for us. Any other questions for anybody? Looks like no more questions from anyone. So we'll share this presentation, and whatever questions we get from others, maybe we'll put the answers and jot down together, and we'll share the same too along with the presentation. Okay, there is one more question before I could complete. So which are the most important browsers? So today the most important browser, especially in e-learning, is Chrome. So this is the browser which is almost used by more than 60% of users today, as per the latest stats that we track. So more than 60% people use browsers, Chrome browser, and this applies to the desktop, this applies even to the Android tablet, and few people on iPads also now use Chrome. So Chrome is the predominant browser, and most of the e-learning courses are browser based. On the tablets also there are very few which are app based, so it is more browser based e-learning courses. So browsers, Chrome is the most important, and in corporate circles, especially for in-house trainings, many times IE is important. So even today IE version 9, 10 and 11, all three are important. Many old-time courses or companies ask for all three versions, that is IE 9, 10 and 11. But most important, as I mentioned, is Chrome. Firefox importance is diminishing nowadays. So IE and Chrome are most important, and obviously on iPad, Safari is the most important. Okay, thank you very much. So like I said, we'll share the presentation and the queries and their answers on our site, and you can refer to the same. Thank you very much and have a good day to all of you.